2012. You know, like, okay, I'll get to the point where I can go out and publicly tell people, well, it looks like we're going to have some really wild stuff to see. And the interesting thing is, I said to the Iani, there's one thing I don't want to be, and I refuse to be, and that's a false prophet. I'm not into that stuff. And if you don't know darn well something's going to happen, don't you tell me it is, and don't you have me teaching people that it is. And they said, oh, what we tell you is going to happen. And look at it this way. If you find yourself in a reality system where it doesn't realize you missed the boat and you're in a place called Phantom Earth, and your body already incinerated, you just don't know it yet. There are big consequences to this, and there are big joys to this. We are approaching a time when things that even the Sci-Fi Channel people, their writers, haven't even come up with anything this good. You know, I certainly couldn't. So we're being prepared for a time of meeting our old family, of meeting the Iani. And this book is the beginning of their training course for the people who will be selected by them to serve as the primary guardian force of Earth's stargates here. There will be changes in the portion of the Earth that is called Bridge Zone Earth, that we'll talk about a little bit. It's a timeline, one of the 3 timelines that a version of Earth is going to go on. And on that Earth, the Templar, or the planetary energy systems and stargates, are going to open, and they're going to stay open, and there are going to be energy systems, free energy systems, available on the planet, and there is going to be a group appointed as the protectors of those stargates, so they aren't used wrong, because you can literally blow up a planet in a galaxy if you use the stargate energies wrong. This is the beginning of an invitation into what's called the Emerald Covenant, Coevolution Peace Treaty, the Founders' Peace Treaty. It's an invitation to become part of the security team of the planetary, galactic, and universal levels of the stargates in the star system. It's an honor for me to bring this to you, and it was an honor to me when I was trusted with this material. So this is what all of this is about, and it's real hard to explain in a 3-day or 2-day workshop, but it's for something big, and we have the potential to see that big, and it will depend on where our angular rotation of particle spin is in our bodies, which timeline of the 3 we will find ourselves on. One is called Phantom Earth, where that is not a positive reality field. That is literally where certain things happen that disconnect us from the rest of the time matrix, where you can't get back out and you get stuck. Your consciousness gets stuck and it can't reincarnate out. There's something called the bridge zone, which has to do with inner Earth. And then there's something called the ascension path, which has to do with a planet called Tara, the counterpart of this planet in density 2. These are the 3 tracks of time we're moving into. What we do between now and the time when particle conversion happens will determine where our angular rotation of particle spin is in our body and in the units of consciousness that we hold. That will determine what future we see. So it's very personal and it's very cosmic all at the same time. So I'm going to let us do our break now. Not too bad, like 10 minutes later than usual. Just do a 15-minute break. 15. That wasn't 50. Yeah. And these papers are up here for anybody that wants them. Told me that they were there the whole time. And it has a little card on it that says, Ashayana from all, we love you. And I'd just like to thank you very much for the beautiful flowers, whoever, organized that. And I apologize for having them in my negative space where I couldn't see them, Now I'm seeing them in the positive, so they're very beautiful. Thank you. Alrighty. Now, we'll probably, I should know better than to do this, but we'll probably wrap up around 10:15. I say that because probably that means we'll be out of here by 10:30. I tend to go over time. Now, there's so much information that we're going to be covering, and it's going to be really fun because I'm going to be up all night sequencing the first dose of this, tonight. So I will try to have the paperwork for you that, gives you something to hang on to so you can take home with you. What I want to do tonight, there's a couple of things that particularly if we're dealing with, people of different levels of observation where, if you don't know some of this work, there's a lot of things that I've talked about spontaneously that ended up in other workshops that you might not have heard before. So you might have all sorts of questions on things, but actually they were already answered someplace else. And if you ask me where, sometimes I know and sometimes I don't. It's just one of those videos back there in one of the workshops. What I find is interesting is when people have questions, people are interconnected energy fields. And when a person in a group has a question, they're very often speaking for the subconscious imprinting in some of the other people in the group. So if a question comes to your mind, it's very likely that it's a part of a larger question pattern that is affecting other people that it just might not have come to their consciousness yet. Now, one question that came up over break, and it was a very good one, and I've had this question come up before, and I have gone into, I forget how long it was probably like a 45-minute dissertation on it. I won't do that this time. But it was a question that has to do with Source and has to do with the very spiritual aspects of how one looks at things when you reach a certain level of consciousness, let's say Ascended Master Consciousness or something like that. I'm going to try because I believe and I feel that this question is important to acknowledge because it speaks for more than one person, more than the person that asked the question. I'm also aware that it's a perspective that gave birth to the question. There's a perspective of ideas that have to do with about 80% true and about 20% Anunnaki teachings that teach you a certain way of looking at something that uses truth, but to edit a part of it in order to get us into a place where we choose, how would I put it, simply non-action in our quest to be more like Source or to be more of Source. Source, the collective consciousness that people call God, Source is a still point, but Source is also all action and activity in the universe, in all universes. So Source is not simply a stationary thing that's in a state of perfection. It does not move, does not experience itself in different ways. Now, I won't be able to quote the question exactly, but I will try to round the question up in a way that I can get to a point that I'm feeling guided that should be brought out, because there's an issue called balance that is the answer to the question, that can help us understand a lot of things about how the nature of manifestation works and what really is our role in relation to the process of finding out we're creators. The question had to do with, let's see if I can put this correctly. It had to do with negative and positive. It had to do with acceptance. And it had to do with action versus non-action. The question had to do with, if one goes into the higher states of consciousness and becomes an ascended master, or how I would put it is at the place where we all are ascended masters, isn't it true there that all polarity is dissolved and there is no preference, is what I understood the question to come to, that we simply learn to accept all things. We simply learn to accept and love all things, because as Source, we know that all things are part of us and manifestations of us and take place within us. There is a truth and a fiction to that, all at the same time. As Source, as the one Source, Source is the consciousness that becomes the negative and the positive polarity in electrical charge that becomes electromagnetism. It is the identity that becomes the force of order and the force of chaos. It is the identity that becomes the force that down here we might judge as good versus evil, or manifestation versus demanifestation. These are the polarities that exist within Source, because it is necessary to have polarity if you desire to experience the hologram of projection. So therefore, Source does allow for and create the negative side of things as well as the positive side of things. When we move into a space of incorporating more of our sourceness, where we get more of that consciousness into our bodies, we do have a different relationship to judgment. The words good and evil don't mean the same things anymore. Evil becomes understood as a state of ignorance and innocence to knowing. But that doesn't mean that all actions are perceived equally and desired equally by Source. Now, if we follow the thought pattern or the idea that Source is a unified field, indeed, Source is in its wholeness. Source is a unified field, and therefore is in a state of vibrational harmonization, or vibrational co-resonance, which is the feeling we call love, with all things in the universe. And you cannot judge, which is pushing away and separating, and love, which is harmonizing and pulling together, at the same time while you are in polarity. However, Source can do this because Source is simultaneously in polarity, manifesting as polarity and manifesting as wholeness, coexistent. Polarity exists within the wholeness. If we follow the thought pattern that our job is to transcend polarity consciousness, which is making judgments about things. Oh, this is good and that's bad. This is evil and that's holy. This is negative and that is positive. And we assign a value to one of those that's better than the other. It is true that we are missing a point. The point is that they both coexist, and to have one you must have the other. Source creates manifestation because it has a desire. It is an intelligence that has feeling that's a little different than how we experience emotion, but it's direct cognition feeling. It has a desire, and from the desire comes an intention or a cognition, and then an intention, and then a will, and then a thought form, and then a manifestation. The core desire of why creation takes place is because Source desires to know itself continually and perpetually in as many new ways as it can. Of course, it's all simultaneous, or new and old, or kind of like only terms you can experience when you're in the hologram of polarity. In order to create an experience for itself in which Source could study, explore, expand, express itself in all sorts of different forms to know itself fully, the framework for polarity was created. The cosmic matrix, which is called the energy matrix, which is a certain way that Source organized units of its consciousness within itself in order to create polarity of those units to set in motion first vibration, because Source was a still point, all just still and knowing. And inside itself, it decided it wanted to know movement, action, individuation, expression in a different form. So in reality fields that are constructed on dimensionalization, Source created a structure for that dimensionalization to occur. It created the structure by sending into opposite electrical charge and magnetic charge. There's something called base electrical and base magnetic, which is force, or the way consciousness of Source interacts with itself. This began the process of creating, or set a template for creating, a reality field within itself, almost as if you're sitting there closing your mind and you want to think of, okay, I want to experience this type of thing. So you create a thought form. Well, the whole universal cosmic structure is a thought form of Source that takes place within Source, just like you can close your eyes and make an image in your head. This is how reality is perceived from the Source level. Now, the original intention of Source in creating a polarized universe was to be able to fulfill the experience of expressing and knowing itself in individuation, in many forms. Source is dimensional structure. It is the units of consciousness that form dimensional structure. Source consciousness is the consciousness of the planets, of the galaxies, of every energy force that it's known throughout the galaxies, and of every individual. The time matrix, or the cosmic matrix, We have cosmic matrix and then the smaller time matrix within it, are platforms of consciousness within Source that Source can play and experience itself in all sorts of different types of form and interaction of form. Now, in order to have what we call positive experience, or let's say an experience that creates the feeling of joy and expansion and happiness inside of ourselves. That's what those things look like from down here. When you're in a polarized body, you will, until you bring it to the next level up, experience happiness or sadness, where you're experiencing in separate pieces the wholeness or the totality. When we get to the question of, does Source have a preference? Since Source is both, does that mean Source endorses action that could be perceived as so destructive that it could literally destroy the framework itself? This is where the question of, is it our job to just simply become so much of Source that we have no value judgment at all toward either negative or positive? The answer to that part of the question is yes, that's right. The idea is to acknowledge both exist, to realize that to have one you must have the other, therefore both are essential and necessary. So you do not impose one value that's different from the other on the core condition of creation. You know negative and positive must exist. Particle and antiparticle must exist if you're going to have a holographic experience in which to know yourself as Source. However, that framework of reality, that framework is dependent upon units of consciousness in Source being organized in a specific way. It's a delicate balance of energy particles, of positive energy particles compared to negative energy particles. When I say particles, I'm talking about, we can take it into physics, where we go into the charge, the electrical charge that particles have. Some have a negative electrical charge, some have a positive electrical charge. When we're dealing with Source at that level, up past D15 and past the primal sound fields into expansion, we're dealing with something beyond electromagnetic energy. There it is acknowledged that both polarities are important. Both are equally loved, equally valued, equally intentionally created with an original intention to be able to experience objectification and externalization. This is where balance becomes the key. Because in the holographic framework, if one or the other side of those things got too far out of balance with the other, you would create within Source where the thought form kind of imploded on itself. In physics terms, that is exactly what particles will do. If the balance of negative and positive forces are not held within that still point at their center, which is the Source intention, the intention itself can become compromised, and Source does not permit that to occur. Source also is aware that when you are in polarization, you as a part of Source, as part of the consciousness that once upon a time you were the one that decided to do this, but once you come in to objectification, your form will determine how much awareness you can take with you in that particular lifetime. while you're in polarization, the realities of polarity will literally be manifest in your consciousness and in your body. You will have experience of joy, this feels good, pain, this feels not good. You can learn to react to pain in a way where you say simply, oh, this is energy too. And you can go to joy and say, and this is energy too, which takes you into a different space of feeling. It raises the emotional body to a higher level, where you can say, I acknowledge both. You can acknowledge both and choose to stand back from it, which in truth is called denial. Or you can acknowledge both and fully allow them to run through you, both polarities. And when they run through you, when you don't assign a value or push either one of them away, they transmute. They come together, the polarities, particle and antiparticle, that compose those thought forms, come together, transmute, turn into antimatter, and go to the next level up. You progressively transmute the polarities so you expand back into source. There is a distinction between choosing not to value judge, well, I like good better than bad. I like positive better than negative. Some people like it the other way around. If you can realize both are the experience of energy and consciousness in polarity, both are valid, they are fine. But while you're in polarity, one will feel more expansive and one will feel more contracting. Source is aware of itself, being in polarity, simultaneously being in wholeness. It doesn't fear for its ability to expand back into itself, for it knows it can't become lost. It knows it can experience the absolute worst thing that can happen to a being or a universe, which is, in the physics terms, implosion, which is hitting a point of contraction so severe that the template of that form or that planet or that universe literally fragments and goes back to simple units of the consciousness of Source. Now, they still exist within Source. They're not separate from it, but those units of the consciousness of Source hold very, very little recognition of the significance of knowing itself. It's the difference between being unconscious of your relationship to anything else, space dust, or progressively expanding your form to hold the knowledge, the wisdom, the knowing, the vibration of the entire time matrix, and then the energy matrix beyond it, and then Source. We all go back to Source one way or the other. We go back either through fragmentation completely, where we become undifferentiated units of consciousness that do not hold memory of the journey that they were on. They're just as blessed. Or we can go back in the full expansion by which we literally internalize again the entire frequency patterns of a 15-dimensional matrix, the sound matrix beyond it, energy matrix, and then expand back into Source with full knowing. There's a difference between being a conscious co-creator with and as Source, or being the substance of itself that Source will use in its active phase to create with. When we come to the point of recognizing that, first of all, getting caught in polarity consciousness means dividing things up into good versus bad, and I prefer this, so I'm going to push that away from me. As soon as you push it away, you're guaranteeing you're going to lock yourself into a relationship with it. You need, really, energetically speaking, it's exactly what you do. We need to integrate, but there's a teaching that's put out, and it's inspired by what's called the Ruby Order Matrix, which is a branch of the Anu Elohim. The Anu Elohim were once a part of the family called the Elohai Elohim, which are the founders' races. They became what was called a fallen angelic matrix, a fallen founders matrix. They attempted to lock the light field in this time matrix by using the divine science mechanics in a certain way that would allow them to not have to go into co-resonance with Source, which means not have to co-create with Source, where they didn't have to listen, in other words. They went into something called code convolution, which is like a little too much inbreeding, where your template gets all messed up and you get some really strange outcomes that weren't intended. The Anu Elohim have been there's a whole history that we have already revealed in the other workshops, and some of it is in this Templar book, that explains what the original fall was, what the original sin was. We don't endorse the concept of sin, but we're showing you where that concept came from. The Anu Elohim created a race called the Anunnaki in reaction to the founders' races, the Christos founders' races, who were in at one-ment and co-resonance with Source. The founders' races created humans, or what became the human race line as an angelic race line, as a team that was sent in to bring back into balance certain things that had gone far too out of balance into the chaos principle. Because this time matrix was about ready to explode, because its stargates had been compromised to such a degree by the fallen Anu Elohim. The Anu Elohim, fallen angelics, are very beloved. The founders' races acknowledge fully that you're us, but the Anu Elohim do not acknowledge that. They are taking the stance of Source being ignorant to itself, of being innocent to remembering its oneness. The Anu Elohim and the Anunnaki race lines that they created have a very long history of promoting the conflict on this planet and in others in this time matrix. They've created a group in what's called Dimension 11 that attempts to hijack the consciousness in this life field in order to drain it of energy so they can stay self-perpetuating without having to make the higher connections to the higher dimensional field and to Source to get a perpetual supply of energy. Humans were created as an intrinsic part of that particular drama. Source created them as that. Source created Anunnaki as the other thing, because Source is exploring itself in unknowing in the Anunnaki and Anu Elohim races. It wasn't a part of the original intention of this time matrix. However, because Source is all, even something that is in opposition to the original intention that was set by Source will be embraced, harmonized, brought into the pattern, and stabilized so it can achieve a state of harmonization so it becomes part of the one. in terms of the Anunnaki races, it meant helping them to heal. So they had the potentiality of ascension, because their destiny would take them back into space dust. They didn't have the templates that would allow them to get out of a time matrix. The Anunnaki races, and this isn't going to be a discussion on the history of the Anunnaki. I've done a lot of that already in other frameworks, in other workshops. And some of it's in that book, and there's more coming out in a book that we have coming out supposedly in November. It was another quick one that my publisher is going to be publishing. It's called The Forbidden Testaments. Forbidden Testaments of something or other. Anyway, they're forbidden. I can't remember. There's so many titles. Yeah, the Forbidden Testaments of Revelation. That was it. They're the original things that were in the several books of what became Revelations in the Bible that talked about in detail all of these type of things. So I don't have to spend, this workshop isn't about that particular book. This is about information we need first. But I brought up the Anunnaki because right now we're in the middle of a situation since 25,500 BC on this planet where there has been a progressive corruption of the teachings of sacred mechanics here in order to get human consciousness to be in a particular position of non-action, where it is tricked into thinking it is behaving like Source and as Source if it simply chooses to do nothing and let the illusion roll on. That is called a state of detachment. It is the opposite of the state of love, which is vibrational harmonization, which is full engaging. We are being tricked using the concept of understanding Source, where it is neutral as far as value judgment goes. Both are beloved. Both polarities are beloved and part of the self. However, Source is not neutral when it comes to the original intention. To have a time matrix, to have a reality field where both polarities could exist so that experience could be known. We are being programmed by twisted teachings, 80% good stuff, 20% twist, and if you don't know enough of the mechanics, you can't see the twist. We're being taught to project our thoughts in a way that will render us as undifferentiated units of consciousness, which are what other forces that have their consciousness intact use to create things with. We are being disempowered by a twist on us. Yes?
But wouldn't you consider that Buddhism was a form of detachment, that its teachings were to be detached?
Buddhism was originally part of one of the 12 tribes doctrines that were taken off the Dora plates. See, there are 12 tribes of angelic humans seated on this planet. Each one of them was given guardianship over one of the 12 CDD plates, placed Dora plates. Those plates were created by the founders to hold a certain level of information that had to do with mechanics, with science, with social order, with spiritual development, with relationship to Source, relationship to the other races. Buddhism was originally part of the sacred teachings. So was what we call Christianity. So was what we call the Jewish faiths. Originally, all the religions on the planet right now represented a portion of one of those 12 plate teachings. When you put them all together, They gave the full externalization to the degree that this stuff could be put into externalization of the reality of what it meant to be a part of Source. Now, everyone, and this is what we got into in the Atlantean conspiracy when we talked about that in the England and Ireland workshops, where we began to reveal that information. There has been a progressive infiltration of our race lines here to create DNA mutation. There has been a progressive, there was a great house cleaning in 9558 BC, literally ships coming in and getting rid of, using photosonic weaponry, everything they could find that would give evidence that there were ancient human cultures that spanned millions of years. There was a house cleaning done. And then there were some stories taken. Stories from the original plates that have been translated were taken and twisted. Every one of the religions at this point has been contaminated. And you can read them as like, how do you separate the shaft from the grain? You can't tell. The religions have been polarized, where one side is expressing truth and the other side is expressing its opposite, and you can't tell unless you start to really get into the frequency behind what those words are saying, because words are mathematical programs, sound tones. So you asked about Buddhism. There are certain teachings in there that are true. You can reach a state, there are things that teach about nirvana. There's a certain level of consciousness that corresponds to, I believe, the 11. Interestingly, home of the fallen Elohim, and a lot of other good guys too. But there are teachings from D12 that take you beyond the nirvanic state, which is your beginning of detachment from matter in order to flip through and make the transition into antimatter. Then there's a whole expansion again where you engage again. If you completely go into detachment, saying, well, it's all the same to me, do you really think Source just says it's all the same to me, I'm going to go do something else, and just lets it run? See, this isn't what happens, but this is what the Anunnaki teachings or infiltration of good teachings has tried to do. It has tried to make Source out to be a force that says, oh, well, I created this, and I'm totally neutral, so I don't care if people are suffering and feeling terrible. That's their problem. They're down there now. They'll evolve to become bigger where they don't have to feel that anymore because they can choose not to identify with the pain. If Source were coming from that level of consciousness, personally, I'd want to find another one. If that was what God was like, because it would show me something that's different from me. Now, wait a minute, if we're all manifestations of God, yes, okay, part of Source might look at it that way. But which part? The part that fully knows itself or the part that forgot the rest of itself? The part that's in negative polarity or the part that's in wholeness? I know that beings, even in polarity, if their templates are intact with dimensional structure so they can receive the consciousness coming down from Source into their templates, a huge compassion for everything. They progressively learn to embody the state called unconditional love, which is a state of vibrational harmonization or co-resonance between this and anything else outside of it, so everything becomes a part of you. When you are in a state of love with a thing or a being, you can compare it to your children or to something that really inspires that love feeling. It is the opposite of total detachment. Now, if you go for attachment, you end up strangling the thing you love and it runs away. You push it away. There is a balance between engaging and disengaging. There's a still point in between those two things that allows the state of love to happen. This is the state that Eastern religions were originally trying to help us develop that level of consciousness. But there are teachings out there right now. And, it's really funny. There are two basically infiltration teachings that are happening. You have three representatives on this planet here. You have people who are getting information from what's called the Draconian Matrix, which is a D10 fallen angelic, the fallen seraphim matrix. They're the reptilian races, and like the Zetas and those guys are all of the fallen seraphim races. And then you have the D11, which is a little higher in consciousness, fallen Anu Elohim matrix with their Anunnaki contacts, and boy, have they been busy. They've been teaching us some great stuff. 80% good, 20% twist. And then you have the founders. The angelic humans of this planet are representatives of the founders, and there are some of the Anunnaki and Draconian fallen races who came into human form as part of the Emerald Covenant bioregenesis program, so they could get their templates back and evolve to be Christed beings and beyond again. Right now, we're in an amazing period of time because you have all the forces confronting each other. And if you look at it in terms of matter, particles, antiparticles, and antiparticles, the Trinity, the Divine Trinity, it's even represented in the belief systems and in the interstellar contacts that are happening right now, and in relation to the people who are incarnate on the planet right now. There are people that are in human form, that appear to be in human form on the outside, who did not incarnate out of the human matrix at all. Some of them are on Anunnaki consciousness that are good guys, that evolved and got their Christos template back, and they're here to help balance and heal the drama. Same thing on the Draconian side. But then there are also races we call the Illuminati races that are representing the fallen angelic creeds. One of the things the fallen angelics do is they teach you detachment, so you kind of walk around and not care much. How they control the people who are in human forms, which means they have the potential to evolve back to being Christed. How they control them is they make sure one level of consciousness can't talk to the next, where the people just see 3D and they don't think anything else exists. So if something comes and whispers, "Hi, I'm from a higher system, I'll give you this sacred knowledge, follow me, give me your power, and I will get you, to whatever it is you want," right? This is how people that were called the Illuminati races, the ones that work in certain aspects of world government, certain aspects of world religion, certain aspects of the world management team that we don't know about and we don't hear about on the news, that are controlling and running agendas here that are very, very detrimental to this planet and its people. They are really the greatest victims, but they're the victims of their own consciousness from the higher levels. Because it's literally those people who have incarnated out of one of the fallen matrices. Now, they're all in Source. They're all parts of Source. That's why the only appropriate response to them is love. The only way you're going to heal them is to love them. But that doesn't mean just open your heart and turn your mind off so we can suck your energy off your astral body. Because your heart center, your fourth chakra, is your fourth dimensional aspect of your chakra vortex system, energy distribution system. Brings energy in from D4. It's connected to your fourth DNA strand template, and it's connected to the astral level of your biofield. So if something from D4 wants to feed off you, it'll tell you to open your heart and turn off your mind. You don't need to know that. Just let the angel handle it for you. All of this stuff is trickery. The founders will teach you that you have a level of you that is a founder. They will teach you that you don't need to worship a Christ outside of yourself because you have one right inside of yourself. You also have a rishi. Hindu religions talk about the rishis, and they have been twisted to where Hindu people will bow down and grovel and hand their power over to a rishi, because the twist has said that I have this, and I am a superior being, and you're a lowly being, and you don't have this, which is an utter lie. Any being down here, it implies the fact that you have the rest. What makes the difference between what level you will express compared to somebody else is how much of your consciousness you can get into your body. It's not that you don't have it already, because you do. We're all ascended masters. Now, we chose as ascended masters to come into a reality system with a specific template that happens to be our body blueprint. We chose why we wanted to come, and we chose our body blueprint in relation to why we wanted to come. If we came for just kind of like a sojourn through the densities, and I'll help out here and there, but we really had a real kind of tough time last time, let's just kind of enjoy it and be, you'll come with a smaller DNA template, because you don't need to anchor so much of your frequency and your consciousness. It's still up there. You'll bring in to manifestation only as much as you need. It's energy economy. Plus, it's kind of like systems are kind of like classrooms that you apply for and see if there's room. If we all decided we were going to come into a system and be fully activated, ascended masters, but it was only a density 1 system in dimensions 1, 2, and 3, ascended master consciousness is up in the primal sound fields, which has 24 times 15 charge, let's put it that way. You try to bring even one full one in, which would come into about 1,728 times 24 individuals, you blow the place up if you brought in too many. So it's kind of like, okay, I'll play Ascendant Master this time, you'll play, root race person this time. But at a certain level, we know we're all equal. Same with the fallen angelics. They're not bad guys, because at that level, really, good and bad don't apply. God pretending it's awake and God pretending it's asleep is more like it. Because God wants to know itself. And if it's going to know itself awake, well, that implies asleep. What would that be? So there is a level where it is all okay. And there are teams of consciousness that come in, the source manifests itself as, that are the balance keepers. They're the restorers when balance is out. They're called the security team. In this time matrix, it's the Azurite security team, which was the original race that was created to serve that purpose. A race called the Orifim came out of that, which meant sons of light, and not sons, boys, but sons, flaming balls of light. Yeah. Beyond gender, beyond polarization. The Orifim were the seed race, the host race, that another race called the Turanicium, which was a down step of the Orpheum came into. The Turanicium is the name of the human race. So the fact that we call ourselves the Azurite Temple of the Melchizedek Cloister, Melchizedek is a sound tone frequency that corresponds to the particular family of consciousness of Janus that seeded this time matrix. Melchizedek is a tonal signature of that collective of Janus, whose consciousness is in here as all of us in this time matrix, including the fallen angelics. That's them too. Azurite refers to the first race of peacekeepers, sort of. But sometimes it's not peacekeepers. Sometimes it's not war starters, but sometimes it's hands-offers, where at times intervention is appropriate, where if you have a force that is created, or source created a force of beings to come in as an expression of source to just keep the balances. Sometimes keeping the balances is just standing back and letting the scales do this. It's only when it goes like this and the other scale is like ready to fly off the thing, which would be like explosion of the time matrix, that's when the force that came in to keep the balances will exert action. When things can balance themselves and come to their natural thing, where you have, certain reality systems will have warring and polarity in the lower densities, non-intervention is usually the stance that will be taken, because the beings that are having the problems are trusted. It's known that they have higher levels of consciousness, and they're trusted to eventually get past that rough spot and be able to get their next level of consciousness in. It's only when the beings get so lost in the illusion of the hologram that at times intervention is needed. When non-intervention is chosen, a lot of people say, well, if they care, why don't they do something? It's horrible. Look at all the horrible things that have happened, even in human history on this planet. And believe me, these are mild when you start to see what happened in the last 950 billion years since the last life wave come into this time matrix. We have been given the main important parts of the history that have happened since then. And this looks mild, the things that have happened here, which are pretty awful compared to what we're used to thinking. If you're going to make a value judgment, no, I wouldn't want to experience them again. But there is there is a delicate balance for every person, every manifestor. Because remember, you're a part of God that forgot that you were part of God. You are a manifestor, you are a thought creator. You will create thoughts consciously or unconsciously. If you create them unconsciously, they'll do what they want to, and you usually end up with chaos. If you choose and learn to relearn what you knew up at these higher levels anyway, to create, you can create order and balance. But there is a still point between 2 points of action called vibration and oscillation. Vibration is contraction and energy holding. Our scientists here haven't quite identified this yet, but a few of them have put it out, and they're kind of like picked on by the other physicists because, no, it's not our standard theory. No, it isn't. You have vibration here, which is energy holding, which is base magnetic particle template. And over here, you have the opposite of that. You have oscillation. You can look at it as light bulbs. Over here, you have the light bulb off and the energy contracts. It was like, as if it was hiding inside of the light bulb. And over here, The light turns on, it expands. You have contraction and expansion. And when one side contracts, the other expands. As long as that balance is kept, and that balance is kept through the still point in the center. So you have particle, contracting particle, base magnetic. You have antiparticle, base electrical, expanding. And you have the still point within, which is the place where the two of them are held together in their original unified form. That's the point of balance that allows both to exist. This is a pattern that's repeated in everything, from molecular construction to cosmic template construction, to how our hologram is projected outward into what appears to be objectified manifestation. So it's the point of balance that we're looking for when we come into saying, okay, I'm going to remember that I'm a creator, and I'm going to start to try to learn how to remember how to create consciously. You need to learn a balance between when to put energy in